Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Francis Thicke, someone who, for most of us, hardly needs an introduction, but for those who don't know Francis, he is well, shall we start from the beginning? He's a trumpet player, and a very fine one. He has a PhD in soil fertility, and he was I may be saying this incorrectly, Francis, so you can correct me, but he was in the top levels of research at USDA in soil science, or mid-level. We'll embellish it a little bit. It's just fine. We're among friends. And when he came back to Fairfield, he took over Radiance Dairy and has really done an extraordinary job with the dairy, both as an economic entity, something that really works financially, but also something that has become really a signature of Fairfield. I have friends in Chicago. If I come and visit them, the deal is that I can visit if I bring a couple gallons of Francis milk with me. Francis was on the USDA, I was a commissioner, a USDA Organic Standards Board, and is now very active in the Iowa Organic Association. And I will let him tell the rest of this story, but let's have a round of applause.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me be part of this meeting. And isn't this a beautiful building here?
Yeah.
Wow. And as we drove up, I realized this is right in the middle of the Radiance Dairy pasture a few years ago. This was our pasture for the first 5 years that we were here. So interesting. Yeah. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about soils, but kind of a full circle in that I started farming organically in 1975. And then, the whole thing was it's all about soil organic matter and building soil organic matter. That's kind of the solution to all problems. And then I went off and got a PhD in soil fertility. And I learned that whole model. And it took me until just this last few years, about 30 years. I finished my PhD 30 years ago. It took me about 30 years to come all the way around back to really realize the power of soil organic matter. And there's a lot of new research coming out that's really exciting. And I want to just mention that, and that's kind of the basis, I think, for regeneration of our whole society, I'd say. And if you look at this is from the Land Institute, Jerry Glover, looking at the roots of a prairie plant. The power, think of the power of that. And then when you think of the prairie that was out here and how all those roots were in here, creating this rich, deep soils that we have here in Iowa.
Turn off the cover. Are they filming?
I think that the lights have to be on, I think, for the filming, yes.
Okay, sorry.
And when you think about it, it's basically because Iowa is famous for having some of the best soils in the world. But when the last glacier left 12,000 years ago, there wasn't any soil at all. It was just a geologic wasteland. The glacier had scraped all this loose material down from Canada and northern Minnesota and dropped it here. If you ever see these big round granite rocks, those are from Canada. They're illegal immigrants, actually. And so there was no soil at all. And only as plants and animals colonized that loose geologic material that created soil by putting organic matter in it. And organic matter is what defines soil in my mind. Otherwise, it's just loose geologic material. And so when you think of the power of the ecology to do that, it didn't take any fertilizers, any pesticides to do that. Nature just did it, bootstrapped its way up. And so if we can examine that process, I think it's a very powerful process. And this is not our farm, but this is a picture of a grazer. And you can see what they're doing is following the same process that was integral to developing our soils. Because the prairie plants are very tall and deep-rooted. A lot of you have heard me talk about this before, but it's my favorite saw. And then when the bison would come through and graze it off, when the plant was short and knocked down, it didn't need all that root mass, so it sloughed some of that off in the ground. And then it would grow new tops and new roots. And so each time it got grazed, it would pulse that organic matter deep in the soil, creating these deep black soils. But now since we started farming in Iowa, we've lost about half our topsoil to erosion. And we've lost 60% of our organic carbon to oxidation. So as Wes Jackson from the Land Institute says, we've been deficit spending our ecological capital all these years. And so we kind of have that in mind. The longer we farm, the more we pollute the water, the more we erode the soil. And it doesn't have to be. If we can start to farm in the image of nature that created these soils, then we can start to regenerate, to regenerate our soils. And that's what I want to talk about here. And this is a grazing system that mimics what the bison did. It gives the cows each every day or maybe several times a day just as much grass as they can eat. And they eat what they can and they knock the rest down. And then that process, and you can see the manure scattered around in there, and then what's matted down the soil food web is eating, and it's feeding that, and so it's building that soil very quickly. And then the root mass is also building the soil. So, and then the cows move on, and then when it's regrowing when the cows come back again. And that's the process that we use in our farm too. But we can see that if we can use that process that nature used to create the soils, then we can actually start to regenerate our soils. And something is interesting. This is in tropical soils. Now, when I learned soil fertility, we learned that on the left over here, these are tropical soils called oxasols. And what they are is that they've been weathered so many years, millions of years, and all of the good nutrients are gone on the left. It's just iron and aluminum. That's why it's red. It's rusty iron. And so, like here we have all these nutrients. We have silicone, and all the nutrients are built into our soils. And so we really have tremendous soil fertility. Now here in our part of the state, our soils are about 500,000 years old, but about 500,000 years old, yeah. But we got a little, when the glacier came last time, we got a little coating of loess on top. But nevertheless, our soils are old, but these are very old, millions of years old. And they've been, by leaching, and the heat and the leaching has leached almost everything out. Well, we found, interestingly, on the right, these same soils, some places in the Amazon basin that were totally black and rich and tremendously productive. And it took many years to figure out, and nobody knows for sure exactly, but there are some theories now, what happened. And they're called terra preta, black soils. And they find that these are so productive, they can actually take soils away and take some away and put in your garden, and it almost regenerates itself. It's so productive. It's a little match, you go. But how did it happen? Well, the theory now is that in those ancient times, they did something called pyrolysis. They dig a pit, put in, when they cut trees down and branches, they put it in there, and then they light it and get it on fire. Then they snuff it out, and it would turn into charcoal. And then they put that charcoal in their soils. And so it's pretty amazing. There are quite a few of these soils out there. And actually, I have a friend here in western Iowa who's doing this very same thing. This pyrolysis is called. And he's developed a little mechanism where he can use old bales or wood chips or whatever, and you make this biochar. And this biochar is, it'll last in the soil for like 1,000 years. So most organic matter, if you take corn stalks or something, put it in the soil, by the end of the season, 2/3 of it will be digested, decomposed. By the next season, 2/3 more of it will be. So only a very little bit of it will turn into that black humus, that black organic matter. But with this biochar, and that humus will last in the soil for like maybe 100 years or 200 years or something. But this biochar will last for 1,000 years. And so this is pretty exciting, a way to actually sequester a lot of carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, and at the same time make the soils tremendously productive. And this biochar is different from most charcoal. It has a lot of micropores, and the bacteria live in there, and the nutrients are connected to it. And so it's a whole new area of research, but the scientists are studying a lot now at the universities. And I think it's going to be a real future thing to apply this to our soils and sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. Because we know that we've lost about half our organic matter, our organic carbon, and there already is around the world more carbon in the soil than there is in the atmosphere. And in both the atmosphere and in the biosphere, all the trees and all the grass and everything, there's more carbon in the soil already. And so if we can just start to build that soil organic matter, we can really sequester a lot of carbon over the years. And here's what this is from a farmer in North Dakota, Gabe Brown. And this has really opened my eyes, is that he's comparing, this bottom line is his farm. And these are some other farms. This is an organic farm nearby, all his neighbors. This is a conventional farm that's no-till, without much diversity. He said this is a no-till farm with a lot of diversity. But if you look at the bottom line of all this, like phosphorus, he didn't put any nutrients on this soil. Phosphorus, potassium, and this is water extractable organic carbon. Tremendous buildup. And by using that process very intensely, I think we can actually build soils much quicker than nature did. We don't need to take 12,000 years to do it, fortunately. And so he's getting tremendous results here. This is what soil scientists say you can't do. Because when I learned soil fertility, it's like beaker chemistry. If a plant has so many pounds of nitrogen, you need to put that many pounds on, and we're going to lose a lot, and so we need to put twice as much on. And for phosphorus and potassium. But now, this is in North Dakota, which is a rich plant parent material. But this is incredible. This really blows my mind, actually, to see that. Without putting anything on, he has 5 times as much phosphorus and more than that of potassium that has come out, basically been released from the soil. Yes?
And that's just because he's got livestock.
It's because he's a good question. Because he's got the whole biological activity of the soil being so strong, and the microbes are dissolving some of the soil minerals and making them more available and cycling them around.
But it's A because of the livestock.
Because what?
Because he's got livestock.
Well, the livestock,
That's raised.
yes, but I'm going to show you a little later how actually you can do some of that with cropping too. But the livestock can accelerate it because, there are really machines out there. You know, they eat it all off, and then the manure comes back down again. And what they don't eat, they tramp into the ground. And so the livestock are a very efficient way to build the soil.
What does NS mean?
What does what mean?
NS?
MS.
NS.
Okay.
No-till, high density.
What is he doing?
Medium density.
Oh,
So yeah, in his system, he has a very high density livestock system. So
what's NS?
NS.
What is that?
The truth is, I don't know.
No soil?
I just pulled this out of a magazine, and this isn't really research. This is just a farmer taking tests, and he actually had some scientists helping with his tests and take them to the lab. This isn't like replicated research, but that's what we need to do, is to see what's really possible. NS. I'll think of it later.
Yeah, you will.
So it's pretty exciting that we can actually do this. And so there are 3 basics that I say for building soil. One is have living plants in the soil at all times. We have that nature always has it in the prairie. There's always something alive there, and that has a lot of implications for water quality and for erosion and for a lot of things. But for building the soil, and to till as little as possible, because when we till the soil, we break up the soil aggregates and oxygen comes in, and we stimulate the microbes to break down the organic matter somewhat. But sometimes we have to have a balance. If we're farming organically, we need to till sometimes. But then I think the most important part is always having something living on the soil, and as well as the residues on the soil. And the third thing is diversity, as much diversity as possible. And that's one thing that Gabe Brown and others are finding too. If you have one cover crop of one species, you can gain a lot. But if you have multiple species, you can gain a whole lot more. And so that's exciting too. And these are things that really need to be researched, and farmers are kind of leading the way. And that's often the case. With organic farming back in the 70s and 80s, the universities laughed at it. It took until there was money available in about 2003 for research that they finally woke up and decided it was something to research. And so that's what happened with grazing. This innovative grazing farmers were way ahead of the researchers. But the researchers need to get on board, and they are. So look at kind of comparing our industrial model of agriculture with this ecological model. A lot of diversity in ecology. We have monocultures. Nature is self-sufficient. We have high inputs for our crop production. And nature conserves and recycles. Really, there's virtually no waste in the natural ecosystem, because the waste of one species is food for other species. So everything is cycled around. Whereas when you have a monoculture, it tends to leak. And I'm going to show you later why that is more. Okay. And while this is already here, most of Iowa, the best soils in Iowa have tile drainage. About 4 feet down, there's a whole network of drainage. And when it rains, the excess water goes down into the drains and out. And the problem, you've heard about the nitrate problems, right, in Iowa? And so the nitrate gets down. Nitrate is water soluble. So when the rainfall comes in and it's nitrated in the soil, it'll take it with it right down the tile drains to the ditches and into the rivers. And we know that nitrogen is a limiting nutrient for the dead zone in the Gulf here. And this gets about the size of New Jersey. This last year was about the size of New Jersey. What happens, of course, is that when the nutrients come down, it causes algae to bloom, and then when the algae die, they start to decompose, and that causes hypoxia, lack of oxygen, and any of the sea life has to either leave or else it dies, and so it's called the dead zone, of course. And the goal is to make this the size of Rhode Island, but we seem to be growing every year, or this year was about as big as it's gotten. And the goal was, I think it was 2015 that we were supposed to have it down to the size of Rhode Island, and we didn't, and so the new goal is now 2035. We just set the goal out a little further.
Voluntary, of course.
Voluntary, of course.
So he's getting the size of Texas?
The size of Texas. Okay, now I'm not going to show a lot of data, but I think it's very poorly understood why we have nitrate problem. And I've talked to some of the politicians, and they seem to understand it, and then the next thing you know, they're saying something different. And the problem is that it's counterintuitive, because we think, well, if we want to reduce the nitrogen, we just put less fertilizer down, right? But the research shows that's only going to reduce it by about 5 or 10%, and we have to reduce it by a lot more. And so we are putting too much fertilizer on sometimes at the wrong time. But the bigger problem is that we don't have something in the soil all the time. We don't have live roots in the soil, because corn and soybeans have live roots in the soil for about 5 months of the year. So most of the year there are no live roots in the soil, and so nothing has scavenged that nitrogen. Now, in a perennial, the research shows when you have roots year-round, a perennial cropping system, hardly any nitrogen will escape. Well, look at it here. This is a study looking over 4 years. How much nitrogen, look over here, came out of the tile drains. Here, 194 pounds per acre came out over 4 years from continuous corn. Now look down here. These are perennials. Alfalfa and CRP is grass. Only 4 pounds out of 4 years, 1 pound per year. And so when you have a really robust root system, it scavenges that nitrogen before it can get away. And so that's what we need to do, is to beef up that root system in our rotations. And so even alfalfa, which is a legume, it fixes nitrogen, but it actually will scavenge. Before it fixes it will take what's there. And so even though it's a legume, hardly any nitrogen escaped from the alfalfa, which is pretty interesting. And here's another interesting thing, is that continuous corn soybeans leaked almost as bad as continuous corn. Now, we put a lot of nitrogen fertilizer on corn, but we normally don't put no fertilizer on soybeans. So you'd think if you don't put any fertilizer on, you'd have a lot less leaching. But actually, almost as much. And some research recently shows that soybeans can leak nitrogen as bad as corn. And we're not putting any on. And that's because of what's in the soil. The soil, and politicians will say, well, there are about 10,000 pounds per acre of nitrogen in the soil, in the organic matter, which is true. But they say, well, it's no wonder it's going to leak, because when it rains, it's going to take that out. But they aren't aware of the fact that it's because there are no live roots in the ground. Because that 10,000 pounds per acre cycles constantly. When you have a prairie system, there's always some decomposition of that nitrogen in the organic matter into the mineral form. I don't think I have that slide here. And so maybe 200 to 300 pounds of nitrogen goes into the nitrate form, but the plants scavenge it and they cycle it through and back into the organic matter again. Yes?
Isn't it also that the corn roots are really shallow, so even when there is corn, does it still benefit?
Well, the corn and soybean roots are not as deep, of course, as the prairies and prairie roots. Yes, and alfalfa roots and some of these perennials. And so that is a factor, but just the main leaching is when the corn plant dies and soybean, when it's finished with the cycle, then there's no roots, and then you see the leaching when the rain falls in the fall, and especially in the spring, when we get a lot of rainfall before you plant the next crop, there's nothing to catch that water, and it goes right down, like flushing the toilet. Yes?
What would be an ideal rotation that would maybe make economic sense for a farmer following beans or corn?
Well, what would be?
Could you repeat
Yeah,
the question?
I will repeat the question. Yes, good. Okay.
Something I said?
Okay, yeah, an ideal rotation. Well, if you have something like hay in the rotation, but you see the whole system needs to change then, because most of our animals are in feedlots and they eat corn, mostly corn. Most of the dairy cows are in the feedlot. And so if we would feed them more hay and graze, then that grazing is about as ideal as you can get, because hardly any nitrate will leach out of the perennial root system. But then if you can come as close to that as possible, if you have a rotation with maybe corn, soybeans, and then hay, oats and hay for 2 years, then you've reduced it overall quite a bit. So the more you can get perennials into the system and cover crops, and I'm going to talk about that.
So it's more than just a 7-month rotation, you're talking about a full year.
Yeah, multi-year rotations. Multi-year rotations. Yes?
When I was a kid, that's what all the farmers did. That was the rotation everybody did.
That's right.
And did it change because of big ag? Is that why it changed?
The point was that when she was young, that was the rotation everybody did. And why did it change? It changed for the reasons that corn and soybeans are the most profitable, there's a lot of complicating factors, and part of it is that the farm program payments have favored those things over the years, and ethanol now, with the ethanol mandate, that means more land came out of these other diverse crops into the corn production. So a lot of reasons but mostly it's industrialization. The animals go onto the feedlots and they're eating mostly corn. It's true that cows that eat corn and stand on concrete give a whole lot more milk than cows that graze. But cows that graze, they're a lot healthier and they live longer. And so research at the University of Wisconsin shows that there's more money made on a grazing cow per cow than there is in a cow in confinement. But there's a lot more production in confinement. I mean, the average cow in a dairy in confinement lasts about 2.5 years in the milking string. And we just realized our oldest cow is now 16 years old. Yes. So,
How long do cows regularly live?
I'm sorry?
How long do the industrial cows live?
Well, I was mentioning that the industrial cows, as you call them, they usually, the average is 2.5 years in the milking string. And so they're 2 years old when they begin milking, and then they last another 2.5 years on average.
So their life is 4.5 years? in total?
Their lives is about 4.5 years.
We
Yes.
have one of 16.
Yeah, that's pretty old though.
That's
I mean, but we kind of have a goal of trying to get a cows to 10 years.
And the funny thing is the cow, it's similar to the female human because their pregnancy is 9 months and their menstrual cycle is every month also.
It's every 21 days.
Everything similar.
Yeah, it's similar in those ways, yes. Okay, so this kind of shows that, how that cycle works. The red line shows in the spring, as it warms up, the soil nitrate production from the soil organic matter. Remember, there's 10,000 pounds per acre in Iowa of nitrogen in that organic matter. And when it gets warm, the bacteria start to eat that and break it down and release nitrate. And so this black area is that free nitrate that's available for leaching. And so if you get rainfall during this time, before the red line is where you plant the corn and soybeans. And it starts to take on nitrogen, the nitrate. And so between here and here, you have this open time of very high potential for leaching of nitrate. And then the corn and soybean go through their life cycle, and then they get to the end of it, and then here we have nothing being taken up by the plant. And so we have this window here where it's very susceptible to leaching as well. And of course, this is when you want to plant a cover crop. So back to Jeffrey's question, what can we do? If we plant a cover crop right at the end of the cycle, even get it started before this plant gets done, then that green line would be another bloop here, and it would start to take out nitrogen like cereal rye, and then it would last up into the spring, and it would be, it can go right up into where the other crop starts to grow. If you do it right. I mean, a lot of the cover crops that we see only get not very tall, and so they don't have as much potential. But we're going to see some if we get to it later. So here's a cover crop during the winter time, and that rye is about this tall, but the roots are down a ways and taking up that nitrate. So then it'll actually release it then during the next cropping season. What's interesting is that this is some research in Iowa, comparing an organic rotation, corn, soybeans, oats, alfalfa, with conventional corn, soybeans. And they found that the nitrate leaching loss was half of the conventional. And that's very significant because you probably heard of the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. It's a goal to reduce our nitrate enough till we can stop our contribution to the dead zone and get it back to the size of Rhode Island. And the goal is 41% reduction of nitrate leaching in Iowa. And here, this organic rotation reduced it by 50%. So that's pretty significant, and for two reasons. One is it's a more diverse cropping system with perennials in a system. And another is that the nitrogen for the crop comes from the alfalfa. Unlike the corn, where the fertilizer comes in all in one slug, and that's sitting there, the alfalfa is killed in the spring and then it degrades over the year. And that releasing of nitrate is timed better with the uptake demand for the corn. And so there's sort of two reasons for that. But this is pretty significant to see that happen. We could, basically by going to that system, we could solve our water quality problem, our nitrate problem overnight. And what we see instead during the winter is across Iowa, you drive around mostly bare fields that have nothing growing on it. This is like a starvation thing. All the soil bacteria are going to dormancy because you were starving them at this point. And so in here even some tillage. for the winter. So the goal is to have something growing all the time. And as a practical farmer, as Iowa likes to, has their little slogan, don't farm naked. And let's look at that, soil, a little pie chart. The soil has it's mostly mineral matter, but soil organic matter is about 1 to 5%. This is a small sliver. But if you look at what's inside of that soil organic matter, well, first of all, is the biology. And the plants, as they die, it gets decomposed with bacteria and fungi, and then protozoa and nematodes eat these fungi and so on, and then bigger nematodes eat the other ones, and blah, blah, up to the world, and back around it again. So that's a very dynamic system that's constantly breaking things down and not letting anything escape. And also plants are feeding the soil bacteria, which is something that we've kind of discovered more recently in science, is that a lot of plants, 30 to 40% of the energy they get from the sun, the photosynthesis, goes into feeding the plant. They put it out of their roots, they exude it out their roots to feed the bacteria. It's amazing because, well, of course, we think of the photosynthesis causes the plant to grow by building the structures, but they actually release a lot of it intentionally to feed the bacteria, which then solubilize minerals and cycle minerals in the soil to feed them back again. So it's a symbiotic thing. Now, if we look at what's in that organic matter, here's a living, we saw that little picture of all the living organisms here. But there are a lot of different components, and we need to have all of these going. We hear about humus. This humus is stable organic matter. But we have to be always having this fresh residue coming in, and then this is the decomposing, the active fraction that's cycling around and building humus. And so the more we have this, the more we can build this humus. We're forcing into the humus state. And if we don't have anything on the soil in the wintertime, it's bare and we're not feeding the soil, then we're going backwards. And then we have less of this, and then we're starting to burn up some of this humus, and we're starting to eat up our organic matter. So we have to be constantly feeding the soil if we're going to build our organic matter. And there are a lot of things, interesting things. There's soil mycorrhizae, and normally a root has these little hairs that reach out and grab nutrients and so on. But when there's the mycorrhizae, they actually are fungi that they reach out into the soil, and then they actually reach in and they reach inside of the plant cells. And the plant feeds them energy, carbohydrates, and then the mycelium bring in nutrients, and so they can increase their root mass considerably, their ability to explore the soil considerably compared to without having that in there. And of course, when they till, we break that up a bit, and so it has to reestablish. And so the less we can till, the more we can facilitate that whole mycorrhizae development.
Why do farmers think they need to till?
Well, tillage is for several reasons. Mostly it's been because to kill weeds. And of course now with herbicides, people don't, some people are no-till completely. They don't use any tillage at all. But organic farmers don't have the herbicides, and so we traditionally have relied on tillage a fair bit for weed control. However, organic farmers usually have a much more robust rotation, and so we're putting more back in. But now we're seeing some work on trying to reduce our tillage in organic too, and I'm going to show you that. I don't want to...
No, just keep going. We're good.
Okay, let's skip this here. This is some more legumes and how their nodules fix nitrogen from the air and feed it to the plant. The plant feeds the rhizobium, these little nodules, and then the rhizobia can take nitrogen from the air, which is very inert, and they can make it into proteins that the plant can use. And so that's another symbiotic thing. And I want to just look a little at how we're trying to do that on our farm. This is the farm we moved to in 1996 on Brookville Road, and this was one of the waterways. It was really beat up, and so the waterways were all, this one here is about 4 feet deep. And on the side hills, a lot of places, all the topsoil is gone onto the subsoil. So it's just like, it's sort of like the glacier just left and it started over again. But, so it's a good experiment to see how fast you can build it, right? And so here you can see on the side hill, it's just like the red high clay material and not very black. And it was in the bottom of the hill is where it ended up, and a lot of it, and so it's very black there. And so what we did is we put a mixture of grasses and legumes on there, trying to mimic the prairie system, but different species that dairy cows like pretty well. And we split it up into 60 pastures, 60 small pastures, about 1.5 to 2 acres each. And you see here the lanes that go around the farm. And so after each milking twice a day, the cows get fresh grass. And so they keep moving around the farm. And then it regrows again. So you can see here is the electric fence, right here, and here's where they were, this is where they're going. And then by the time they come around, it'll regrow. So we're trying to use that same process. Now this is what we're not doing. And if you see, most of the time when you drive around Iowa, you see cows on the pasture, and they're in the same pasture all the time. Whereas what we're trying to do is we have them in there, they graze it down, we give them only as much as they can eat at one time, and they eat it all. Because if you give them too much, they'll take their favorite plants and they'll eat them until they kill them. And that's what happens here. If you give them the whole thing, they'll eat something and kill them. And you end up with, except for the thistles, mostly like lawn grass, bluegrass that's short. And when it's very short, it's not very resilient in a drought. You know, if it's short on top, it has a very shallow root system. And so it's not a very resilient system. And here's a schematic showing that, an ungrazed system. And if you take half of the grasses and leave half and come back and let it regrow, you have a much more root system, a bigger root system than here's one. Going all the way to what's called set stocking, which is what mostly you see, and it's grazed down constantly, and there's very little root system there, so we're not really building a lot of soil in that kind of system. This is some more, this is another little study from Mississippi, Alan Williams, and his system, he calls it, it's a new name, stocking density, high stocking density, animal, whatever it is, I don't know. But it's comparing his system to a slow rotation and continuous grazing. And if you look at the carbon at tons per acre, this is over about 10 years. He more than doubled his carbon from this one by a high density stocking of his cows. So it can be done. Now compare that to most cows are in the feedlot and they're just waiting for their meal. And so you have to feed them all. And so instead of the cows grazing, you have to go out and you cut the hay and you chop it, you bring it in, and you put it in storage and you feed them every day. And then you collect the manure in storage and then you take it out eventually. Whereas when cows are grazing, you know, they do the whole process in a very ecologically sound way. You know, and it's a key to have it designed right. So we try to have it so all we do is after the milking, open the next gate, the cows go in, we close the gate, they harvest their own feed, they spread their own manure right where it needs to be, and they enjoy their work. and they're healthier because they're in their natural environment, they're eating their natural diet. Whereas it's known that when cows eat a lot of corn, it acidifies their stomach. They're made to eat grass, and so they tend to have a range of metabolic problems. But as I said, they make a lot more milk. It's kind of like white sugar. But the last 3 years, I remember looking back at our taxes, we have had a zero veterinary bill. And so cows can be a lot healthier from that kind of system. As far as the energy, just think of the energy savings for not having to chop all that feed and bring it in and take all the manure back out. The cow's doing all the work. And so that's another part of the energy thing that we're trying to do on our farm too is, one thing we do is for our watering our cows, remember we have about 60 paddocks, and we have water tanks that go to all of them. We have underground pipe about this deep that we use all spring, summer, and winter, not in the spring, summer, and fall. And then we have a 6,000 gallon tank on top of the hill here, and we have a pump, a solar panel here and a pump. The pump fills up the tank, and that gravity feeds to all the pastures. So that works pretty well for us because you know, we're on road water otherwise, and if you run a tank over all night, it can be a lot of water. Whereas if you run this thing overnight, I've oversized it, so it'll pump this thing full in a day, 6,000 gallons. Or even when it's cloudy, the pump is a DC pump, so it'll run at half speed, and it'll actually keep up to the cows even on a cloudy day. Did you have a question?
So the pond takes care of itself, and you never have to buy water because
The pond takes care of itself, yes, and the pond, the whole watershed for the pond is all organic cropping, so we don't have to worry about getting any synthetic chemicals in that system.
Do you have no tiles, no tiling?
We don't have any tiling on our farm, no. But we don't have a lot of flat land. No, we have to be clear about one thing, that in north central Iowa, it's called the prairie pothole region. And that's because it's a new landscape. The last glacier is only 12,000 years ago. And there's not a lot of drainage, and so if you didn't tile drain that soil, it'd be a big wetland. That's what it was. And so you can't really farm it unless you tile drain it. And so that's the dilemma there. But now we can use we can do something to ameliorate that problem too. And so this is the water tank that cows accessed. And then we also have a frost-free below the pond is up above that. Water gravity feeds to here. And so that tube goes in the ground about 8 feet, and it's the geothermal heat keeps it from freezing over in the wintertime. So that one, and we also have another one that the dike is up above the water gravity feeds, and this one is a continuous overflow And so it runs constantly, it doesn't freeze either. But instead of overflowing over here, there's a standpipe in the back, and it runs down that and out into a ravine nearby. And so the cows can outwinter there without having to have frozen water. And we also use solar-powered electric fencers, and we have a hot water system. These are 4x10 panels for making hot water. This is not solar PV, but hot water for our wash up in our processing plant. With this 40 kilowatt wind turbine we put in, which provides, on a net basis, about half our energy needs for the farm. And I'd like to get solar, get another 40K of solar, so I could basically, be a net zero on the farm. And then it would be really neat is to get these battery packs, so I could store it and be really off the grid. But that's when the battery packs come down far enough, that would be kind of a nice thing to do.
5 years.
5 years, okay.
No, it's actually about 3 more years, I think.
You thinking about 3 years of battery packs?
The flow batteries.
The what?
Flow batteries?
Flow batteries.
Yeah, they're going to be cheaper.
What are flow batteries?
Well, flow batteries are a different system from the lithium battery. And they're basically big tanks of liquid, mostly water, but they have, one of the systems is called vanadium. And vanadium has different valences.
Okay.
So it's different isotopes of vanadium. And then, so there's a flow of positive to negative.
Oh.
And then that's replenished.
Okay.
And the lithium battery, it doesn't drain. Not the flow battery doesn't drain, whereas the lithium eventually drains out.
Gotcha. Interesting. I can look that up.
Yeah. So they're saying that in about 3 years now, the flow battery will replace peaker plants.
Wow.
Will replace what?
He said
plants.
that the flow batteries will replace peaker plants,
Yeah.
power plants.
So your main electric usage is in the afternoon from about 4 to 8 o'clock when people are coming home. And so that's the
Right.
peak time.
Gotcha.
And so you have to be able to have energy, and that's when for solar, the sun is setting, so you don't have energy. So you need something to back up.
Great. We'll look at it. One thing on the farm is that we have a lot of trees on the farm. Unfortunately, the previous farmer neglected it, so we had a lot of trees in the tree line, which is good for insects and so on, birds. But also we use that for shade for the cows. So in the hot days, we put them by the trees for shade. Problem is that over time, they start to carry the nutrients and deposit them over there. And they're transferring the nutrients. So what we did this last year is we got a shade. It wasn't cheap, but it's a big umbrella, about 40 feet in diameter. And the neat thing is that the cows can go out and graze, and then they can come back and they can stand in the shade. And the good thing about it is that we can put that shade wherever we want the nutrients. So you can see, after we move it, then if we see a weak spot, we just put it over there tomorrow. Instead of having all the nutrients go to the trees, now we can manage that. Well, I'm pretty excited about that. And then we have our chickens, and this is our mobile chicken house. You open the door and out they go. And their job is fly control. And so you can see them, they're fun to watch, trying to get flies off the cow. Here's one on his back. And one day I saw one chick with a mouse in its beak, and they were chasing each other around, fighting over that mouse. And since then I've seen, that if a mouse runs by, it's like Jurassic Park. They're built like a Tyrannosaurus T-Rex, aren't they? So they can pick and shake, they can kill a mouse.
What the T-Rex has sunk to.
I'm sorry?
It's like what this T-Rex has sunk to.
What the T-Rex has sunk to, okay. And so they're real scavengers. People said that they're kind of fat when they see the chickens, but they can't help themselves because here a bull was eating outside and he spilled a little feed and they went right over and ate it. And one day I saw they were gathered around, I looked and apparently a piece of alfalfa had fallen out of a bale of hay when I drove by, and they were out there stripping the leaves off it. And so that's kind of nature's ecology, is to cycle everything and not let anything get away. And then when it's time to lay an egg, they run in their building and they lay their egg. So they work all day for free, and then they give you a free egg. Organic egg. So that was on a truck, and we were at first doing what a lot of farmers have done, is they follow the cows around. Because when the cows are in the pasture, the flies lay the eggs in the manure, and then the chickens come around and they scratch through and they eat the fly larvae. The only thing is the coyotes ate the chickens, so we had to bring them home. And but now we have a lot more wildlife on the farm since we have so much more diversity. Like I see these wild turkeys running around where the cows have been, and I see tree swallows flying over the cows constantly, and flocks of cowbirds sitting on their backs, on their faces, and so on. So I'm hoping they can do some of that. But we have a whole bunch of other things we do for fly control too. It's kind of the silver buckshot approach instead of the silver bullet. I wanted to show you a little bit about something to kind of illustrate the difference between a perennial system and an annual corn soybean system. In 2008, remember when we had the flood, about 1st of June or so, it rained and rained and rained, and then it quit, and then it didn't rain for a week. And during that week, we were grazing already for 2 months. You can see how big the grass is. We were grazing for 2 months, and the grass growth had pretty much sucked all the water out of the soil. But everywhere else around us, it wasn't. And so we got a 2-inch rainfall in 1 hour, and it raised this little creek here from here to here, 250 feet wide. You can see this the river, just from that one rainfall, 2 inches. And it's because upstream, all the land, our cows have been grazing basically most of the water went right down to the soils in our land because the crops have been taken out, the grazing, the forages. Whereas upstream, the corn and soybeans had not been planted yet, and the soil was saturated. None of the water could go in the soil. And so it shows how this is not a very resilient system to have the annual cropping system. And you can see that erosion, even where there was no till, it pulled off the corn stalks into the side. And it also shows this should be a waterway, there should be grass there. I'm going to skip that here. I think I've said that before. One thing I wanted to mention, the difference between an industrial system, when the manure is in here, if you've driven by a hog cave, you smell something, right? You smell the hogs? No, you don't smell the manure. In that CAFO liquid pit, there are about 300 volatile organic compounds created. And we know some of the compounds are like hydrogen sulfide and ammonia that are toxic. Most of them are somewhat toxic. And so it's because that is anaerobic and it putrefies and creates these compounds that stink. The hogs don't stink actually that bad. If hogs are out in pasture, you don't smell them. Compare that to a cow patty out in the pasture, and we know there are billions of bacteria right underneath that cow patty just waiting for a meal. And here it comes, and that process is aerobic. The byproducts are carbon dioxide and water, not all these putrefied compounds. And so here is in the spring, I kicked over a dry cow patty, and I could count 30 to 40 earthworms in one cow patty. And so that's the difference in the process of nature processing something. And of course, if you compost it, it's also aerobic. And also, I've noticed in the pastures, when the cows drop their manure, within hours, there are all these little holes, look like a buckshot, like a shotgun shot. And those are actually the dung beetles. Yeah, they come right in there and they go in there and they wipe it out. Now we don't have the roller kind of dung beetles that would go in there and tear it all up, and they roll up these big balls and they roll it and they bury it and lay their eggs in there. But these kind here, they will like hollow it out, and that will help keep the flies from hatching too.
I have a question.
Yes?
Do you sell the milk and the eggs in your farm?
Do we sell the milk? The milk is sold, yeah, it's called Radiance Dairy in the stores. The eggs we don't sell. The eggs we do not. We have.
She might be vegan like me.
We have only enough eggs for ourselves.
My question was, in your opinion, why is there such a disparity between the costs of regular GMO food and actual healthy organic food?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What is the question?
The question, is why is organic food more expensive than GMO food and so on, right? Okay.
Regular.
Yes. Well, there can be a lot of reasons for that. And I like to look at it this way, is that when you buy conventional food, you're just really making one installment on that food. For example, in Des Moines Waterworks, they're paying for taking the nitrate back out of the water. That's another installment. The soil erosion is another installment. And your health maybe is another installment. And so if we can produce food at the site in an ecologically sound way, then you maybe have to pay the full cost of that food right up front, you know what I'm saying? And so, now as far as the way we set our prices at Radiance Dairy is that we just set our price so we can pay our bills and make a living at it. And so, it's not like, and we're not going to get rich off it anyway, but that's how we do it. And maybe it does cost more, I guess, to do it that way.
It just makes me wonder, what are the other guys doing that they're paying their bills? Like, are
Well, a
they
lot of them are going
paying
broke,
their
actually.
employee, like,
A lot of the conventional farmers are really hurting now, and they're going out of business too. They go through cycles. Usually, it's very marginal to make a living under the agricultural system today. Did you have another question, Becker?
Well, on this point, when all of you have purchased Radiance Dairy milk, you have actually helped build the building that you're in right now, because there's a lot of that in.
He said that, for the record, he said that there's a lot of manure in this building here.
Oh, I just wanted to throw out, I'm not sure, I mean, as far as I have known, one of the big different disparities between conventional and organic farming is that it's harder to get loans for organic farming, and governmental subsidies go towards very specific things. So corn and soy are highly subsidized, it changes from year to year, and that builds itself into the whole system. And so that's a really big thing. So that's policy and what we're exporting, what we're importing, and who's making money off of what. And organic farming doesn't really fit well into that structure. And so those costs are covered in a lot of ways, but at the same time, conventional farmers are not making money, but they have been able to continue to grow food and sell it because of subsidies.
There were several analyses done over the years to show that there was actually no net profit on the farming and conventional agriculture on the average basis. What kept them in business is either off-farm, combination of off-farm jobs and the subsidies are what kept them actually afloat over many years, which is not good. And we don't really want to put the organic farmers in that boat, I don't think, if we can help it. Okay, tell me when to quit.
No, keep on.
Okay,
We're good.
this is.
Can I ask one more question
Yes.
about the subject we were just talking about? If farmers were to make a transition from conventional practices to organic, there is a bit more labor involved, but when you were talking about your practices and offsetting the practices of conventional growing, I mean, how would you compare that in terms of time?
In terms of time, it definitely, organic farming does take more management, and the farmers in general, especially crop farms, are a lot smaller than the big industrial farms, because basically, if you plant corn and soybeans and spray them, you're set until time to harvest them in the fall. We're under the conventional system, but under the organic system, you got to be right out there managing the weeds, and there's only so many acres you can do. As Wendell Berry says, you need, so you don't want to exceed your acres to ISA acres or whatever. You need to have a lot more management. That's absolutely true. Yeah. Okay, and I just wanted, as far as we're trying to talk about how from the soil up to the animals are healthier. We saw there's more biodiversity in the landscape if you have that way to, you're trying to regenerate your soils using that diversity. But also the cows are healthier and the products are healthier, we think. Research shows that milk from cows on grass is higher in omega-3 fatty acids and conjugated linoleic acids and vitamins and so on. And this compares, Susan makes butter and then ghee out of our milk in the summertime. And she does it in the summer because it's really dark from the grass and it's got all the nutrients in it. Whereas one year we ran out about February and she made some from the same cows on winter feed. And you can see the difference. Pretty dramatic difference.
Same cow.
Same cows.
What was the difference?
And what's the difference?
The difference is that on the left side they were grazing grass. And when we could see as soon as the cows go on grass in the spring, their milk starts to turn a rich yellow. Whereas it gets more white in the winter time when they don't have that fresh grass.
So when I make ghee in my house from your milk, and it's the summer, it would be a different color than the winter time?
Absolutely, yes. So you might want to make it in the summertime.
I must be colorblind because I do it all the time.
Well, this kind of shocked us when we saw that, the first time, sitting side by side. One more thing I want. How many's heard of A2 milk?
What?
A2 in A1, yeah. That's something that's being talked about a lot more in New Zealand. It's really a hot topic. And there's one protein, casein, in the milk that has two variants, A1 and A2. And the A2 variety has been found to be more digestible and healthier for you to have. And the A1 variety has been, some research shows it's associated with some degenerative kinds of diseases. And so in New Zealand, they're trying to breed more and more for A2. And so we started the last year breeding only bulls that are A2 or homozygous for A2. And so this is a little, looking at the various breeds. Guernseys, are almost all A2 milk. They've got good and bad A2. And Jerseys are about half and half. But, so we're trying to bring that up to eventually 100% by breeding over the years.
So you have Jerseys?
We have Jerseys. And so
Why did you choose Jerseys?
why did we choose Jerseys?
Yeah, just for curiosity.
Well, when we bought the dairy, it was Jerseys. I grew up milking Ayrshires. They're about the same for that. But that's what they had. And Jerseys work well because Jerseys have the richest milk of the dairy breeds. It's higher in protein and fat and others. So even when you take the fat off, it has more solids and it has more body in the skim milk than other skim milk. So it's worked out well. I'm glad they had that when we came. So here's our milking facility. A lot of you have seen that. Cows go in here, come out here. And our processing, I wanted to take it all the way through. Here's where we milk the cows. And then the milk goes off into the tank here, where it's cooled. And then our processing days, we pump it through the wall into our processing plant. It comes out of the wall into our pasteurizing vats. And to make steam, it steams it up. There's an air space around the outside. It heats it up. This is this little R2D2 is this cream separator. It's a high-speed centrifuge that separates the cream from the skim milk. And I had some of this thing you don't know. So bottler bottles it and off to the stores then. What I show you, I speak at a lot of conferences, and what I like to show them is everybody's store, with the Whole Foods, and then I mentioned this is all organic produce, and in the other corner we have. The people get sick of that. They're not organic, a little corner. So it shows the uniqueness of Fairfield. And of course, there's our product on the shelf, which you can probably see. I'm just going to go quickly over this thing about. You asked, do we have to have cows? Did you have something?
Very quickly, I thought somebody told me a long time ago that, I don't know if it's true, so you can tell me whether it's true or not, that you milk it by hand and you massage them and then you put Gandharva Veda music to the cows and then you don't kill them and you let it die by getting old. Is that true? Because I saw you milking with a machine.
We do use milk machines. 90 cows. If you want to come out and milk them by hand, you're welcome. But we do have the Gandharva radio station playing there. Yes. And we do, as far as if we do sometimes use Reiki on cows if they need some help, But so the cropping, can we do similar things with cropping as with cows? And I think that we can do some very powerful things with cropping. And this is rye. This is the cover crop of choice that mostly is used around Iowa. But generally it's planted in the fall and it grows up about this high, and then they hit it with glyphosate, Roundup, and kill it and then plant the next crop. But what some organic farmers have been doing is allowing that rye to grow up to like 6-7 feet tall, to grow almost to maturity, just before, at the flowering stage, just before it makes a seed. If you roll it down then, it'll stay down. If you roll it down sooner, it'll pop back up. But if you wait till the right time, it'll lay down. And compare that, all that biomass, you need about 8,000 pounds per acre to make it work. And then you can plant right into that. And instead of, this is our own cropping system, this is our cultivator. Instead of planting, for example, soybeans in rows and cultivating to get the weeds out, that works, but then you have the cultivation, the tillage, and you have a lot of bare ground there. 3 years ago I started the first time. I came in with a planter, and the planter just drove right through here. And I planted it on narrow rows. And so this is already planted now in this picture. And then came through and rolled it, and it was flat. And so that's how it's starting. The seed is already in there, soybean. And so you wait a little while and the soybeans come through, and up they go. And away they go, and all that mulch will keep the weeds down. Of course, it's not my idea. Rodale Institute did a lot of work on the early research on this. And so if you do it right, if you get enough biomass of that rye, you can not only have it weed-free, but you have that tremendous mulch that keeps the moisture in and building soil. And so even by the end of the year, after the soybeans are harvested, we have that thick layer in there. And I grabbed some and pulled it, it's just like almost degraded, but yet it's a good cover.
And don't you still have the root system?
Yeah.
The dead root system is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dead root system. And so what you can do then at this stage is come right in after you harvest the soybeans and plant another cover crop in there. That will grow right through there. You can no-till it in and you won't have bare soil. And so we're working on different systems to try to do that, and make it work. It's a really exciting thing, I think. And so I think that one would quit right there. Yes?
So Francis, with the crimping the rye that you got, so I'm just trying to translate that into a garden, just as
Yes.
So you plant the rye and then like you had your machine that when it was tall, knocked it down. So you would just come through with a rake or lay on it or roll yourself over it.
I've heard of people. I've heard of people. I've heard of somebody doing it, rolling with her body. So you could use a lot of things. You could drive a lawnmower over it.
Ah.
You could do something to roll it down. Yes.
Also, out at Orshon's, they sell like a 55-gallon barrel on the side. It's skinnier, right?
Yes, you can buy it.
$100 and you know,
Right.
just like a.
Now this roller here is a roller crimper. It's a little different in that roller has fins on it that are raised about this high, and so as it rolls over every few inches, it actually kinks it a little bit. But you don't have to get that fancy. If you can just roll, especially in a small area, you can keep rolling it if you need to, roll it a few times. And so in your garden, you could plant, as soon as the crop is done, part of your garden, plant the rye in there. And then as it gets done, plant it, and then in the spring, you can start to roll it in and plant it. Yes?
Have you ever tried to make a crop circle with that branch?
Good
No, what the
idea.
aliens did.
Oh,
We'll talk about that in another meeting.
Kelly?
Like a small garden version of that, when I was gardening more than now, mash was a winter food when it's covered with cold frame cover. And mash is a green that is kind of very lettuce-like. So it's a great winter salad green. It's very hardy if it's covered with glass. Then it dies and goes to seed in like, I don't know, by late spring.
What crop are you talking about?
Mash or mache.
Mache.
Well, I've always heard it pronounced mash, but it looks like mache. So
Okay.
we can sachet about now.
It's a salad green. Okay.
And so then I would just let it die out naturally with the seeds and then plant like broccoli into it. So it's the same principle. It'd be that
Yes.
it would be covered in the ground, holding it, and then broccoli would just grow up out of it. And then my mash would come back in the fall. Or the summer rather, it would come back in late summer, and then it would come back, and then I would have it over the winter again, although it's a little bit of a later start.
Okay, so it's the same thing, a relaying crop. So always having something to feed the soil, because once you start souring the soil, you start to go backwards in your organic matter, in your whole system. You need to always have something fresh going into there. Yes.
I want to share this. In the ledger last week, it was Agriculture Week or something, and the soil scientist of Iowa, whose name I can't remember, there was a whole page article, and he said that our lawns with grass are really no better than the fields when it comes to rain runoff. He said because people keep their grass cut too short. Because grass itself is actually a very good container for the soil and is very good. But he said if people would keep it over 4 inches high, then it would deter the water from running into the ditches and
Good
the
point.
main, you know. So.
She said that if the grass on your lawn were taller, it would help deter the runoff. And also, remember that slide I showed you when it's taller, it has more root system. And so then it would also help reduce leaching of nitrate if you put nitrogen fertilizer on your lawn, which you probably don't want to do anyway, right?
Yeah, and he also said it would be great if people would keep their dandelions in their soil because of the taproot, and then they die anyway by midsummer.
Oh, that's amazing to hear that from university.
Yeah.
No, it's from the soil scientists of Iowa Agriculture, and he I'll show you the picture.
Department of Agriculture?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
well,
he
it's
goes
good.
around to Iowans and he does your spiel. Not as well, of course.
And he can't play trumpet at all.
Any other comments?
Yeah, are you familiar, there's a fellow from Zimbabwe that has been going around quite a bit. He has an institute and he's talked a lot
Alan
about...
Savory?
Yeah, Savory.
Yeah.
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 So he talks about the grazing and the animals.
Yeah, maybe you've heard of Alan Savory. He was one of the pioneers way back in the 80s of looking at that whole process of grazing. And he's talked about how our deserts are just mismanagement for the most part, that if we can start to manage, if we have put animals on it, we can actually rebuild it.
Yeah.
We have this mentality that we don't take the animals all off the landscape out west, but he said if you manage it right, you can actually start to rebuild your soils in any kind of a situation.
Yeah. Well, in Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia, I don't know, the borders, I think with South Africa, he was given a land grant of, huge, I don't know, 10,000 hectares or something like that. And there was nothing there. And he started putting goats and animals on it. And now it's like it has water, it has trees, it has streams and everything.
Yeah, and so if livestock are managed right, because we know that the Midwest had, well, they say 50 million bison and all the antelope and so on it at one time. And so we can't really necessarily blame global warming on the animals, because we had a lot of animals before, and they were building the soil and putting carbon into the soil in the process. So if we manage animals right, which we're not doing in general, we can actually reduce that carbon, or fix carbon in the soil. Yes?
In the time that you've been involved with agriculture and organic dairy and everything, have you seen an increase of people accepting these ideas?
Has there been an increase in accepting of organic and grazing and so on?
Right, yeah.
Well, I think about 25% of the dairy farms in Wisconsin are grazing dairy farms now.
Right.
So it's growing, but they're not 25% of the milk. I mean, because a lot of the conventional farms are 5,000 cows, and there's a biological limit to how big a grazing dairy farm can be, because cows have to walk out and walk back to be milked again. And so as far as the milk production, it's probably not 25%, but it's definitely a growing thing, and the researchers at the universities are starting to take notice and starting to research it now, which is good, because then we're learning more about ecology, the life cycles of plants and so on. When I was a kid, we grazed, but we had just two pastures, one for the daytime, one for at night, and we didn't rotate. We didn't really have that knowledge of the life cycles and resting the plants and letting them grow in the root systems and so on. But now we have a whole lot more knowledge that we can use. It's kind of exciting. So we're sort of taking the best of our traditional knowledge of our grandfathers and marrying that with the best of the scientific knowledge of ecology, really.
Hey, Francis. First of all, when we watch a presentation like this, I just feel to express, personal gratitude and gratitude from the whole community to you for exercising your passion for so many years and creating this. Now, the products that you create, we all love and adore and are really appreciative of, but you've done more than that. You've created a model that is something that becomes part of who we are as a community and how we display ourselves in terms of what we represent.
I want to interject here, and Susan gets half the credit.
Susan was also one of the creators and early founders of our art walk too. So all levels. So my question is, you must think about this because you're always working on perfecting what you're doing here. What does basically the perfect local food system look like to you that not only takes into account grazing and dairy, but other local foods, year-round greenhouses, that sort of thing? What does that template look like that could be duplicated everywhere?
Wow, that's a good question.
In Iowa.
Because even
starting in Iowa.
Yeah, even like with dairy, a lot of people will tell me that we should franchise Radiance Dairy and have it all over the country, and I say, you don't really understand. There's disaster lurking around every corner, and so
yeah, you have to know it.
You have to. It takes a lifetime to be able to try to manage that. And if you tried to put somebody on the street out there, it wouldn't work. And really, it's tough in the produce region to be competitive. I mean, there are people here who are growing locally produced food, vegetables and fruits and so on, but it's a hard thing to make a living on it. And I saw something on the internet a while back, a little video, that blew my mind. I thought, no wonder we can't compete here. There was in California, there were radishes in the rows, and they were harvesting these rows of radishes with a little machine that would just pick them up in a row, and they were just picking them up, spitting them out 2 rows at a time, going down the row. And I thought, my gosh, you know, people were doing it by hand. They'd be down at the end of the row yet, but they could be back and forth down through the whole field. And so the industrial system is very hard to compete with. So I don't know. And I think we have to get back to that thinking that we have to pay the full value of food, because you know, we know that the old thing, it used to be that we paid about 20% of our income for food and 10% for medicine. Now we turn it around. And it's just hard to get through that mindset that we really have to pay for good food. And that's going to be a key part of it.
I saw a presentation just a few weeks ago. I don't know if you and I spoke about this or not, but there's a guy named Reggie from Minnesota. He works for Minnesota Extension, and he has a chicken grazing program that I know he's met with John Fagan before. I've invited him to Fairfield. He'll come soon. And his model works, and they built it through Minnesota Extension. But there have to be several others. And I understand produce and the competitive nature of that, but there may be certain varietals, certain plants that
Yes, no, the chicken thing I think is great, you know, the grazing chickens out. The problem, I mean, it's not a problem, but looking at competing with chicken houses with 200,000 birds in it, it's very difficult you have to expect to pay more for that egg, that it's produced in that way, and you're getting a better egg, no doubt about it.
But market demand, I mean, these are buyers, these are eating chickens, and he's got capacity for free-range chickens that he can't fill. He's got
so the market is growing.
The market's there. Right.
And that's great about it, because now the demand is growing. I mean, back when we left Washington, D.C. and came to Fairfield, I told my colleagues at USDA that I was going to do an on-farm dairy processor, and they like, I know this economist said, he took me aside and he said, look, everybody's quitting that on-farm processing. He said, that's ancient history. And it took me a while to figure out that's because they previously had been selling, the main sellers of the product. But then when the industrial model came in, they were competing on the same scale and the same price point. So you have to have a special product that has a special price to make it work. And another part about the industrial food system is that it may not be more economical overall, but it's a way to split out the profits. I mean, in an industrial, like, so you got 5,000, 15,000 cows, you have the capital investors, they make the most, and then you have the top managers, they make a lot. And then you have the workers who make very little. And so it's a way of forcing the money up to the top. And so that's one reason why these big industrial systems are so successful, is because the capital owners and the managers can make a lot of money on it. And the rest of the workers make very little, but they can keep driving that model. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna follow Ed and say that I wanted to thank you both. Because I grew up on your milk. And that turned out all right. But yeah, no, I really do think of, I don't think we really know each other, but I think of you both often as like heroes of Fairfield, because you really are doing, within farming, I think we haven't been educated very well in understanding differences within practices. And you've illustrated that for us a bit, but having seen, lived out in Vermont and worked briefly on a different dairy farm there, and just knowing the different ways that you can actually do one thing, like having cows and milk, and all the nuances, you both have perfected this incredible system, and you're gems here. And I bring your milk. I brought your milk up to Des Moines to some people who are artists working on a prairie patch doing residency. I'm all about it. They were like blissed out. But yeah, as a young person in Fairfield, I and all of my peers are really grateful that you're here practicing what we want to see more of.
Well, thank you, but we learned something. And what makes it fun is that we always are learning something new. I mean, we find some little thing to tweak and makes it more efficient. So we're always working on those things. And so we learn something new. Sometimes I learn something and I forgot, Frequently. Yes.
I was thinking about Ed's question about what it would look like in
Yeah, we did.
Fairfield to
We
have
didn't answer that question, did
a
we?
local food system. The only thing that comes to me is, I remember when we first moved here in early 1980s, most of the yards in town had fruit trees and rhubarb patches and veggie gardens.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing so much of that now, but I think if we could grow vegetable gardens and have
Grow
our
more of our
fruit
own
trees.
food, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, with the story with the victory gardens during the war, it was a very high percentage of the food was grown right in the backyards. You know, now we import 85% of our food.
Those of us who've lived in Fairfield for a while, if you've lived in town, I'll use my case study, on South 9th, the soil was as good as it gets. I move out on the Walton Road on an old farm on a slope. There's no topsoil. No. And you can't, it looks great from the outside, but there's no real, you have to build your soil if you're on an old, traditionally farmed, especially if there's a slope. That soil is gone.
That's too
And in
bad.
town,
Sad.
it was not farmed and the original soils were there. And
Wow.
still are.
I think the model here is not what you're doing at your dairy farm, I mean, specifically, but that you are treating it like your garden. Treating it like, you know, you have put your time, energy, and attention on that specific piece of the earth. And because it's going to be different every single place.
Yes.
The point is connecting the human with what they're doing when they grow and raise food.
And right, and if we can also do it in a regenerative way so that we're building soils all the time.
Right.
And that's building capital, really, in a sense, in a very real sense.
Right.
But we don't have a good answer yet. We'll keep at it, you guys. We've got a good answer. Go ahead.
What are realistic answers?
Well, anyway, we have to congratulate you as they have done. Although I am vegan, I congratulate you for what you're doing. It's fantastic. For those who love milk, and it's wonderful. And I think it's the best milk around. I have even been in China, and I haven't been in many places of the world.
But you're a vegan, so you haven't had any.
No, but before I turned vegan.
Okay.
So, anyway, so I have a question and a curiosity. The first curiosity is, you might explain it, but I forgot. During the winter time, the winter is horrible in Fairfield. I mean, for me, it's too cold. So it's, how do you protect your cows during the winter, the terrible cold weather?
Okay.
And then the question, I believe you went to Cuba a long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah, you went to Cuba. I think you were invited by the government.
I was on some kind of a scientific tour.
Scientific
Cuba.
tour, yeah.
Yes.
With the great government of Cuba.
Well, your question, what do we do with the cows in the wintertime?
Yeah, but about Cuba, really quick, I mean, you've been there, so because of the U.S. trade embargo, which we hope that will be cut off soon, the pesticides and chemicals from the U.S. will enter there, so they turn everything organic. And then the government, before Fidel Castro passed away, they were doing urban agriculture. I don't know if you saw that when you
Urban agriculture.
Urban agriculture.
Yes, absolutely.
That on the sidewalks or any public park or sidewalks, they have fruit trees. And they grow vegetables in the public park.
Every vacant lot is a vegetable garden.
Yes.
In Cuba.
Yes, and anyone can pick the fruits from any tree on the sidewalk, on the avenues, in the Malecon, anywhere. So something similar could be done in Fairfield.
There you go.
And you can
Are you familiar with our urban garden, with our urban orchard? We have 160 fruit trees at the base of Chautauqua Park.
Oh, okay. But the thing is, it gives us every...
160 fruit trees in Chautauqua Park? And what's going to happen with those fruit trees when they start bearing?
They've been bearing for 6 years. And
what happens to the fruit?
they're being harvested by the public.
Oh, cool.
I have a question.
Anybody can go there and
I have a question for
Everybody
Ed.
can go.
Ed, what would it take, seriously, what would it take to have the city council okay fruit trees on the parking, you know,
On the right of way?
between the street and the sidewalk? I mean, come on. I mean, he was talking about heaven on earth, basically.
Yeah,
Why
they
don't you
have
have
that.
that in Fairfield?
You know, it's an urban environment that has, you know, a tradition and a culture of its own. The issue with right-of-ways starts with the fact that they are right-of-ways, so that if, you know, basically that's where your utilities are. So if you're okay with planting a fruit tree that could be torn up because we have to replace a sewer or water main, then that's it. The other thing too is we run into sight lines because they are very close to the road. And if you're near a corner and you're approaching another area and you can't see the oncoming traffic because of high growth in the right of way, those are the main issues that we run into with you know, with the so you can grow something that's edible in the right of way. We just restrict the height.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
how short does that have to be?
4 feet? I'm just going off the top of my head.
18 inches if you're.
Oh, there, yeah, Kelly would know.
Yes, I have lots of. I view the city as just another natural force that I have to try to grow around. So it's like, whether it's like, is it going to be a drought year? Is it going to be a rainy year? Is it going to be a city cutting me down year? So I just figure out what I can grow, what's going to survive in the long term. So it's 18 inches near the corner to not obstruct. The trees are supposed to be between, well, actually even on they prefer 18 inches to 9 feet to be clear. So you can have trees if the branches are 9 feet up, but then they don't want the trees too near the corner where it will obstruct, visibility. So, and so that does leave you some things to work with. Now, what they did in the alley, I can't justify, but we won't even go there.
And Kelly's had a property where she has done that for many, many years. She's been great in that respect. And fortunately, she probably doesn't have neighbors that mind what she does.
That's what I was going to say. It's complaint
That's where it
driven.
changes in other parts of the community, because everybody has the right to determine what they want those neighborhoods to look like.
And I can
be
respect
lasting.
that. I mean, because there's rules in place, but they're mostly complaint driven. Every once in a while, they get a bug up or something or other, and they just go to the alley and cut things down that are never going to grow into the wires anyway, where the trees of heaven already are, so it makes no sense.
Well, that's the utility cutting those, not the city.
No, I think they said it was because there was a new person who took over the city. But regardless, I'm just saying, it's a force of nature, it's unpredictable, it's a little bit whimsical, we can probably refine it a little, but we can still grow around it.
Yeah.
So you learn.
I believe the code was rewritten, and I asked about growing stuff in the right-of-way, and they said I had to get a variance. I mean, it was like, I said, just, something short, and they said, oh, you have to get a variance, you can't put anything there.
I guess you have to go to the city council meeting.
One answer, I think, to Ed's question about how to grow a vibrant local food system is that just appreciate that we live in a context of a dollar economy, money. So price is everything, right? So
Money.
You may have seen way back, Time magazine had a wonderful cover that showed Niner Ranch founder with his cow, and the title was The High Cost of Cheap. So all of us are cultured to go for the low price, right? So the problem with the low price, as Francis has illustrated, is that we're running deficit spending all the time. We're not really paying for the true cost of our food at the checkout store. We're running high carbon deficits, we're leaching nitrogen, etc. So the way to get to the local food economy, I think it's each of us individually organizing. The first way to do it is your home garden, and as we all know, home gardens produce surpluses, right?
Yes.
So we got to start building local businesses that handle the local surpluses and get them processed. So we need a community kitchen that will leverage the capacity of local farmers, because again, we're going to grow tons of food, can grow tons of food, inside Fairfield city limits because it's the best soil. It really is. So if the city could make that one catalytic investment into a community kitchen, that would catalyze local food businesses who are able to handle local surpluses, and you'd start building the virtual cycle.
Great, good idea.
Start as simple as having a drop site of a local, in other words, it could go into the fresh market, and then maybe down the line, we have a process.
And also some could go into the food shelters. I mean, that's what we do. When we have excess milk, we give to the 3 food shelters in Ottumwa and also in Mount Pleasant.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and why do we have a community garden? I mean, in Sierra Club, we've been showing all these films with communities doing community garden and urban gardening in New York and the Bronx and Milwaukee.
Yeah, and we've made those lots available and no one has come forward.
Maybe
Nobody knows how.
And I've talked about this because that's something I'm really passionate about.
We've done that.
There are issues. I mean, first of all, you have to get some buy-in from the neighborhood. One of the areas was the park on the west side, on the northwest side, which is one of the poor areas of the community. There's a park there, the Heritage Park, that Ed said that we could probably get approval very easily. It's a large park, it's underutilized, it's flat, it's in the northwest quadrant.
It would take a lot of people organizing it.
But that's the thing, is you've got to have reliability when you create a model like that. That's how. Okay.
Well, there's a couple different, excuse me. I mean, I think you have to look at it as a business, really, to be effective. Now, there was an interesting TED Talk by a fellow that I saw actually a few years ago, and he's a Silicon Valley investor who's gone into organic. And he said, basically, the reason organic is so expensive is because there's not enough of it.
Because?
Because there's not enough of it. He says there's so much demand for organic right now, and he said, I'm looking, for places to invest and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of investment. Organic right now is big business. I mean, it's moving into that area of big business. So you have to be able to approach it like a business, and and then in growing like a business. Now, I also saw another video about a farm. Small farm, I think it was only about 2.5 acres in New York, in upstate New York. So it had a relatively severe climate, probably equal to what we have here in southeast Iowa. And this fellow on 2.5 acres, he's growing, his gross is about $280,000. But it's mainly in efficiency, and he gets classes in how to grow. And what he does is, he looks at it as a business, and what crops can I grow, what crops can I make a profit on. And, so tomatoes is actually a big part of it, but he also, tomatoes, lettuce, things like that, and that's where a lot of urban gardens are. With growing those, or they're growing specialty crops or something like that can be done. The other aspect of it is greenhouses. For our climate, greenhouses puts a huge extension on the growing season. So all of that can be done. And then so a lot of it is just organizing. It's coming together as a community, but approaching it really as a business. How is this going to be profitable?
The latest organic report by Ken Roseborough. Kroger's grocery chain hit $1 billion in sales of organic food. $1 billion in sale of organic food. Kroger, it's like a Hy-Vee, but in a different part of the U.S.
$1 billion. Well, I wanted to get quickly back to your question about the cows all winter. What do we do with cows in the winter?
How do you protect them?
How do we protect them? Yes, and I could have put those slides in, but didn't have because of time. We actually use that winter time for a way to build soil too. Is we take areas where we're going to build the soil, and we feed the cows in those areas the bales of hay, and they eat. As they eat the bales, they put the manure there. We put bedding from the lay-on And so by spring, we have a thick layer of
They'll be indoor, right?
mulch. This is, I'm sorry?
The cows will be indoor.
They're outdoors. We give them most of the time.
Could you,
Cows are outdoor
could you
animals.
follow him with this? Because I need to.
There's
something
else I wanted to say. If it's
can't.
below 10 degrees and it's above 10 miles an hour, then we put them in the shelter.
Yeah, got it.
But they
Got
prefer
it.
to be outside. The first
You have
year,
to
I
keep it in.
gave them a choice, and they would go out in the pasture. They prefer, I put hay there by the barn and hay out in the pasture. But we do it in a way that they, every time we put new hay out, or we move it down the field, and then they keep spreading manure and we keep putting bedding. So by spring, we have a whole mulch layer of manure and bedding. And then we let that sit for a few months, and it helps to build the soil. And it makes a tremendous improvement in the soil fertility. So we try to use that as a way to build the soil too. Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Francis. Wow.